right, Manny, I thought we'd take a look at the internet weather for this week. No real big movers and shakers. As we could see, these two guys just swap positions, 80 and 81. This is the scanning with respect to like the actual probing, not how many people are doing it, but just scan probes in general on different ports. A lot of things we see all the time. Telnet still number one position by pretty sizable margin here.
Yep.
445 TCP is the Microsoft SMB protocol for file sharing. We're actually going to take a closer look at that one just to see how things have trended over the time here, but nothing surprising here. I guess I'll note the GETH Ethereum wallet is still up pretty high. It's just a small number of actors here, so but they're still looking. Remote desktop protocol we saw all the time. 80 and 81 are web-based ones. 81, I believe there's a security camera system that listens on this that's being targeted because there's a vulnerability there, but nothing that we haven't really talked about before on the show. So let's take a look at 445 TCP. This is a very long-term chart. So this is 5 years actually.
5 years.
And I say stop your crying, because if you look back here in the prior to 2017, May of 2017, you'll see that it was kind of, a regular noise floor of activity where it wasn't really, and this is how many devices are scanning, and this is the amount of scanning.
Right.
So the amount of scanning is a little bit more gritty.
Yep.
It's not as fluid as the number of scan sources, so I kind of showed them together over the same time span so you can kind of see how they go together. Because this is kind of interesting here that I don't really have a specific explanation for, other than we had increased amounts of scanning for maybe 6 to 7 month period back in 2019, and it's since gone back to kind of a normal pace than it had been. But I think the maybe notable thing here is this little red arrow I have here is when WannaCry emerged, and you can see that's when things really took off.
Yep.
This little dip here is not real. That is actually a data loss on our side, so don't pay attention to that, but I can't remove it from the chart, so it's there. But you can see it kind of has stayed, and it's kind of tailed off a bit. I wouldn't say this is all WannaCry. There's lots of other botnets, just like we're talking on other stories. Once one person piece of malware author finds a good vulnerability to exploit, lots of other malware actors out there jump on the bandwagon.
Right.
So CVE 2017-0144, which is the Eternal Blue exploit, has been used by a lot of other pieces of malware as well. It's some to even greater effect. I want to say WannaCrack maybe or something. There's a couple other ones out there that actually scooped up a lot of victims as well. So let's move on to the most sources probing. Again, nothing really, we look at the change from the previous week. There's not a lot of change. Nothing really jumped up from below as taking over noticeably. But we'll take a closer look at number 7 here, 8291 TCP and 8728. I actually kind of linked them together because they're both for MikroTik. Those are both MikroTik router ports, and there's some congruence of activity there that we're going to take a look at. And then we'll take a closer look at 5555 TCP as well, which we've talked about on the show before, so we'll just jump right in here. So this is the 8291 TCP and 8728. The blue is 8728 and the red is 8291. And you can see that it's a stack chart. So, but you can see that there's periods where some ports were used more than others. This is a year, I believe. 2020. Yeah, this is a year. I'm sorry. Yeah, it is a year.
Yep.
But you can see there are some periods where the port 8291 was used, but not the blue. But then at certain points, there was definitely a lot of consistency in terms of, this is the number of scan sips, by the way, devices scanning these ports at the same time, and then it tailed off here. This nice little decay is very botnet-like, the way that decays like that, where they all receive the stop command and they start to stop, although there's a little spike that happened there. Could be a different botnet or something. And then it resurged again and has continued at about similar levels that they're scanning here. And those two ports, I think we might actually have I might actually have a picture of some of that scanning looks like. I'll take a look here in a second. So this is just an article kind of talking about the MikroTik Router OS-based botnet. It's been kind of propagating for over a year now, where people have been looking for these devices that haven't been patched. And similar to a lot of those IoT type devices out there, they find them, they can deploy malware on them, and then recruit them into their botnet. Maybe I didn't have a picture of this, picture of that activity. But in any event, there's those two ports that they're scanning on. The last port that I thought was interesting is the port 5555 TCP that we've talked about on the show before. It's known for the Android debug bridge, which is a kind of debug service that you could turn on Android devices, and then you could connect to it, and then kind of while you're running a program, some Android app, you can debug it real time. So some people or some products, there's a lot of Android-based IoT devices besides just phones out there. There's like set-top boxes and all kinds of other types of devices that run on the Android operating system. They've accidentally left that service running even when they ship it, in the box out to customers. So some of those have been inadvertently exposed to the internet, and there's also a mix of other activity because there's some Soho routers out there that are not Android-based, but they use TR69, which is kind of like a management protocol. On that same port. So it's not really the same types of devices, but we're seeing probes on both of those.
Okay.
And I was going to show you, I do have pictures of what they both look like from a packet perspective, if you see it in a honeypot or something like that. So this activity kind of started back around 2 years ago. This is a 3-year chart. So about 2 years ago, we really started to uptick, and we've been talking about it ever since. Prior to that, there really wasn't much of anything. This little blip here is probably interesting to figure out who was this, where they had about 5,000 scan sources. Is it 1,000? Yeah. 5,000 scan sources all of a sudden, but then it went away, and several months went by before it really became a more regular type of activity. And again, there you can see some of these decay lines here where scanning has been started and trails off. So this is the Android debug bridge probes that we see in our honeypot. And you'll see, I was going to do a count on this. It looks like we're actually getting a lot more of this activity than I had noticed in the past. These probes that start with CNXN, that's actually how, there's an article that somebody did about how you exploit the Android debug bridge and connect to it. That's part of the connection mechanism to the Android debug bridge, and that's part of the payload that you'll see. So all these probes from all these different sources here, which isn't that many. I've got maybe 5 or 6 a day, something like that, that hit our one honeypot from various different source IPs. Were coming in. So that's one type of activity that we saw on that port 5555. And then the other type that we've seen this actually a little bit more commonly, it seems like, but not as much of this lately, is this TR69 probe, which is actually an HTTP request that you can make to a device that's listening. And some of them, basically he makes a connection and he passes in this big XML body here that says, this is what I want to set my new settings to. Like, here's the NTP servers and whatnot. Some poorly developed devices where the source code is not well constructed, they take whatever these values are that they stick in here and they do things with them at like a Linux level, but they're not doing any kind of input sanitization on them. So you can see there's a backtick and another backtick, which basically means execute this. So if you have poorly written codes that's not looking for that, it may inadvertently execute whatever you pass in the new NTP server 1 parameter, which is what they're hoping this device, my honeypot, it's not going to do that, but a real device that was vulnerable would. And what it would do is it would go fetch using wget, this malware payload, which was not there when I looked this morning. And then they run it. So they use SH, which is shell, to run the thing. And then that's how they would infect it, so that the device becomes infected. So just a couple of things, these are the things in the top 10. So there is a lot of activity on them in general on the internet. So things to be wary of if you have any devices that might be of this nature or exposing these ports to the internet. And if they are, I would recommend you not expose them and or only expose them to sources that you know and trust using some sort of filter or whatnot.